Um, this will be focusing mostly on the climate elements of the budget. There's a lot of good stuff in there as well, actually, from a biodiversity and a water perspective. We haven't gone into heaps of detail on that. So I can't speak to exactly how good those things are, but there's certainly a lot of investment in this budget that looks very interesting, is more significant than we've seen in previous years. But as I said, we just need to look into that a bit further. I should add, what we see here today in this budget is the result of a lot of hard work from a lot of people. And that obviously includes the minister and her team. It includes bureaucrats. I think I've seen a couple of bureaucrats on the call here. It includes work of some of our friends and allies. Lee from Friends of the Earth is here. I've got friends from VCOS and Trades Hall on the call as well. But it's also come as a result of a lot of hard work from, frankly, all of you people who are here on the call as well. When this pandemic hit, we and you were all calling for government stimulus measures that would simultaneously solve the climate crisis and address environmental degradation. And, that's been a real singular focus for us all year, really. And it's been fantastic to see that all that effort that we and you have put into making this happen has, landed with a fantastic budget today. This is a pretty arbitrary breakdown of what's in the budget, just, I guess, to sort of give a little bit of structure to the things that I'll run through. But I'll go through each of these in turn. This is really one of the big centerpieces of the budget, and the minister highlighted this in her speech, that this is really about driving the energy transition and driving it in a way that we haven't seen anywhere else in Australia before, really. I think one of the real signature pieces here is the 540 million for the renewable energy zones. I've got a map there which I've stolen from AEMO, which is roughly where those renewable energy zones are going to be. As you can see, it pretty much covers most of the state. And that in itself is fantastic from a regional jobs perspective. I was asking in the lockup this morning where that money is actually going to be spent, and it's going to be spent on a lot of, frankly, quite boring but really, really important stuff. It's not so much going to be spent on building large new transmission lines, but on upgrading what is already there. There might be some short additions to transmission lines to get spurs to particular places, but it will be things like synchronous condensers, transformers, buffering technology. I don't even really know what buffering technology is, but it's also upgrading the voltage of existing transmission lines so they have more capacity, things like that. So the way it was put to me is this isn't necessarily about widening the freeway, but it's about putting in place the things that make sure the traffic flows smoothly. And I thought that was a good analogy that sort of explains it's not just about a bigger pipe, it's about a pipe that can get electrons effectively and efficiently to where they need to be. In addition to that $540 million, again, as the minister said, there's $100 million for Kerang Link, or also called VNI West, which is a big new transmission line going up through sort of north of Victoria through Kerang, ultimately, or near Kerang, to connect us with New South Wales. And that'll be a big opportunity to, as the minister said, again, get that renewable energy flowing both ways from Victoria and New South Wales. There's also a bit of money in there for the second round of VRET auctions, but that's really just the administering of the scheme. A few more things there. $108 million, again, as the minister said. This is around innovative and transformational projects. So in many ways, we should sort of look at the VRET auctions as the way of getting the cheapest renewable energy projects in there. So wind and solar, which we know are already super cheap. This fund is about bringing the other things that will bring that diversity to the mix. Hydrogen is one of them. Offshore wind is another one. So I guess that's about looking forward to what are the next opportunities in renewables and clean technology. There's also money there for community energy projects and for community groups to upgrade their community buildings with solar and energy efficiency upgrades. This was announced last week. There was a little bit additional on this in today that hadn't been previously announced, but we went suitably bananas over this last week. This was a fantastic announcement. And as the Minister said, it's been something that Environment Victoria and many others have worked on for a long time, back when energy efficiency wasn't as sexy. Well, frankly, probably isn't that sexy still today, but it's still just as important as it always has been. Replacing 250,000 old heaters with efficient electric heaters is a massive step forward. Probably most of those heaters are going to be gas heaters, but there'll be some wood heaters as well, and some very inefficient old electric heaters. This will be fantastic for the cost of keeping people's lounge rooms or living spaces warm. It should also go a long way to reducing our gas demand, because in Victoria, the biggest chunk of gas consumption is actually not electricity generation. It's a relatively small slice of the pie for us. Our biggest source of gas consumption in Victoria, in fact, half of our gas just goes to heating and hot water in homes. So if we start replacing 250,000 old heaters, maybe 200,000 of those will be gas heaters, and that's happening over the next 4 years, that will go a long way to reducing our gas consumption. There's a bunch of other things here. I won't read through each of them. One thing I will just call out there is the commitment to minimum energy efficiency standards for rental properties. Again, this is something that EV has campaigned on for several years. We would like to have seen this a couple of years ago, truth be told. The government a couple of years ago established the power to create minimum standards for energy efficiency, which was a good step. And then initially it was just about requiring a heater in the living space for rental properties, which great for tenants, but wasn't necessarily doing that much for energy efficiency. So it's now great to see, this was in the Premier's Facebook post last week, that those standards are expected to include insulation, draft sealing, and the efficiency of the appliances as well. So we're looking forward to being involved in that consultation, and those standards will come into effect in 2022. One other thing I'll call out, just because I frankly didn't even see it in the lockup today because I was just blinded by all the other shiny things that were fabulous. But the Greener Government Buildings Program is actually a really fantastic program. $60 million gone into it today to extend it. And this is about setting up effectively a revolving fund for government buildings, and interpret that very broadly. So this is schools and hospitals, to make them more energy efficient, and that basically ultimately ends up saving taxpayers money, because it means the government is spending less on its power bills. Transport, a shout out to Lee from Friends of the Earth, who pulled these transport infrastructure figures together. Really great to see a big focus on public transport and rail infrastructure. We've seen state government budgets in the past that have been very heavy on very, very expensive freeways. And so it is nice to see a focus on rail projects, both within Melbourne, but also across regional Victoria as well. Transport, we just heard a little bit from the Minister about the electric vehicle road user charge. And the 3-year trial of zero emission buses. An interesting point about the bus trial, I thought the language was interesting. It's not specifically electric buses, it's about zero emissions buses. So hydrogen is actually a really interesting potential fuel source for heavy transport. We're not so convinced, this might come up later, we're not so convinced about hydrogen as a solution for replacing gas in homes, in the reticulated gas network. But we definitely see it has a role, and heavy transport like buses and other freight could be a very good place for that. The pie chart in the top right shows just how dominant cars are in Victoria's vehicle emissions, which is why it was particularly disappointing to see that electric vehicle road user charge. I've seen various theories about how much it could reduce uptake. Already we're way behind other jurisdictions. We've seen in various government documents, when they say, especially if they're building new freeways, they tend to say, well, it's like, the greenhouse gas impact of building this freeway won't be too bad because we'll have a whole bunch of electric vehicles. And so while, as the Minister said, there was about 25 million additional in today's budget for expanding the fast charging network for electric vehicles, it does kind of send this mixed message that we're not necessarily pressing the full accelerator on electric vehicles in the way that we should be, because this effectively this EV tax does put a bit of a brake on things, which is not really what we want to see in this day and age. But in the grander scheme of all the great things in today's budget, there was inevitably going to be something that we're not that keen on. Worth noting, actually, that as far as I understand, this road user charge or this tax isn't actually in the appropriations bill for this budget, and might actually be proposed as part of the next budget in May next year. Whether that means there's an opportunity to change the government's mind on that might be worth looking into. This regional and resources one is a little bit of a grab bag of things that I've sort of drawn from different parts of the budget. We were really pleased to see the extension of the Latrobe Valley Authority. It was the authority was created 4 years ago when Hazelwood closed, as a way of both supporting and retraining workers who'd lost their jobs at Hazelwood and redeploying them to other power stations and mines in the valley, but also with a broader remit of bringing sustainable and more diverse economic activity to the Latrobe Valley. And over the last 4 years, they've done a really great job, and their funding was due to expire this year. And so we're really pleased to see that extended. I've got the figures, most of the figures on this slide in brackets, just because those figures capture a whole bunch of things. It's not clear exactly how much of that 125 million goes to the Latrobe Valley Authority. Some of it went to other things. But still great to see that work will continue, because with 3 other power stations in the Latrobe Valley that, from a climate perspective, will need to close down much sooner rather than later, we do think that transition work, both to support workers, but also to support the community with new economic opportunities in the valley, is critical and needs to continue. Also pleased to see money for the Mine Land Rehabilitation Authority. Some of our supporters will remember we did a lot of work on mine rehab back around the time of the Hazelwood fire. And the existence of this authority is actually a thing that we fought for during the Hazelwood inquiry hearings. The coal mines didn't want it. They thought it was fine to just have one of the existing coal resources bureaucrats deal with it. But we wanted an independent authority. And so it's great to see that's been funded in this budget. Energy efficiency is a winner everywhere. It's a winner in your home, and it's a winner for farms as well. So there's an extension of an on-farm energy efficiency program from the Minister for Agriculture, which is great to see. One other small, again, the electric vehicle tax was one of the things we weren't super happy to see. Another one was $5 million in the budget for the orderly restart of the onshore conventional gas industry. The government announced this, I can't remember if it was just before lockdown or shortly after lockdown back in April, thereabouts, that the ban on onshore conventional gas would be lifted. Worth being really explicit right now that this is not fracking. Fracking is permanently banned in Victoria, but the government has opened the door to onshore conventional drilling. We don't think there's a lot of gas out there, but at the same time, even if there's not that much, we still don't think it's a great idea to be drilling for it. And as various other things have indicated, certainly our preference is for figuring out how to use a whole lot less gas. Although the minister was right in saying that there are some gas users that can't switch to electric. So if you're using gas to create heat, there's an opportunity to switch to electric alternatives. But if you're using gas because you need that methane CH4 molecule for a particular chemical reaction, like chemical plants, they do still need gas. And I guess the smart approach there is let's get everyone else off gas so that we don't need any additional sources of gas, whether it's onshore conventional gas or importing it through Crib Point or in Western Port Bay. And we should probably stop exporting the stuff out of Queensland as well. That was always a terrible idea by whoever made that decision. Getting close to the end. One last one I want to flag is the land. The minister mentioned this as well. There's $92 million in the budget for land restoration and planting 4 million trees across 6,000 hectares. Really important to point out that, as far as I understand, this is going to have a clear biodiversity element to it. This isn't about creating a giant monoculture of blue gums or a giant monoculture of pine. This is about simultaneously creating that carbon mass and storing that carbon mass in forests that will also support biodiversity. As far as I understand, the idea is that this will probably occur in large tracts of land rather than, a few trees for a farmer to plant a windbreak. The idea is it's a large tract, not like distributed small parcels. But we'll see. And that money is rolling out over 8 years. Most of the other money is over 4, but still a good initiative. So what remains unsolved? I guess before I say anything further on this, I want to flag this is a really great budget, and we're really pleased with what is in this. I don't think the minister would disagree that there's still work to be done. I think she indicated that herself. In terms of what remains unsolved, the government still hasn't articulated a clear view on what the future of coal is. We can see really clear signs of that. There are clear implications from, the amount of support going into, building the modern grid that we need to go 100% renewables, and driving those wind and solar projects and new renewables projects. But specifically about how we deal with those coal-fired power stations in the Latrobe Valley, it's something that we still haven't seen. Again, on gas, I've kind of touched on this already. It's a bit mixed. There's some really fantastic initiatives around electrifying away from gas, and those are fantastic to see. But we're still seeing some words in the budget that kind of talk about, some uses of gas needing to continue. I think in particular, what I didn't see in this budget might be in there. There's a lot of documentation was around opportunities for commercial users of gas to electrify. That may be there. I didn't see it though. Electric vehicles, I think, as we've discussed, a bit mixed. The government is investing in the charging network, and that is a bit of a barrier for electric vehicles. But the electric vehicle tax does act as a bit of a disincentive, and we're keen to see more of that in the coming years. Again, I may have just missed this one in the budget. Active transport, I didn't see much of a call out for that in the budget. Keen to see more details on the land restoration and how that rolls out at multiple scales. Large tracts of land is great, but there's probably opportunities to ensure that more of our agricultural land also plays a role in sequestering carbon. And finally, just agricultural emissions. We have a lot of emissions from burping and farting cows and sheep. And we'd love to see some more in that in the coming years as well. As the minister said, we've got sector pledges coming out, and we expect that this will address it somewhat. And very last slide, coming up next, the government has said by the end of the year, some of the things that we're hoping to see will be the emissions targets for 2025 and 2030. Those are really critical. Those will set the trajectory for climate action in Victoria for a decade. And the foundation that's been laid by this budget is really impressive and really welcome. We want to see that reflected in those targets, because those targets really will focus the mind for the next several iterations of Victorian Parliament. The EPA is scheduled to conclude its review of power station licenses any day now. This is already about 18 months overdue. Hopefully, we've been told that will be by the end of the year. This really should be imposing CO2 limits on the power stations. It's madness that they don't already have limits. And we're also hoping to see tighter standards for air pollution as well. Victorian energy upgrade targets, also hoping to see this year. It's a really effective, one of those sort of great but mostly invisible programs. In 2021, there's a decision on AGL's Crib Point gas import terminal through the environment effect statement process, which we're hoping to say will not allow this project to go ahead. And more broadly, there's just implementation of a whole bunch of stuff. As the minister said, and as you've just heard from me, there is a lot of stuff going on in Victoria as of today, or it already has been, but a lot more as of today. And so there's a lot of work for a lot of people to make that stuff as successful as possible. That's it from me. I'll hand back to Jono.
Thanks, Nick. And that was pretty quick putting that together, given that we hadn't seen the budget until this morning. I'm keen to actually keep us on time, because there are other events on tonight. So I'm just going to try and sum up a few of the questions and comments that have been coming through. First of all, There have been a couple of questions on other details around any further details about the community energy projects mentioned by the Minister. Julie has pointed out that Friends of the Earth's Energy Justice Victoria Collective are really across that element. So I'd encourage people to follow up with them. And also some questions on whether there's any, just a quick one for you, Nick. Are you aware of any more details on the funding about solar and batteries for community centres announced today? I suspect you've covered what you know, but let me know if you've got anything further to add on that.
Nothing further to add based on what I just said. I think it's $21 million for those projects.
And do you...
Whoop. Sorry, John, I just muted you.
Thanks, that's all right. Do you happen to know if the GGB building, the Government Green Buildings Program, I think that's what it is, does that include the Greener Government School Buildings Program, or is it separate?
Truth be told, I'm not entirely sure. I think the Greener Government Buildings Program does cover schools. If it doesn't, I suspect there's a separate bucket of money for schools. But it does cover, hospitals, prisons as well, I think. So it's much more broader than just, a bunch of office buildings in the city.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Sorry, and there was a bit of money to continue the Resource Smart Schools program, which I know one of the questions that came in before the webinar was asking about.
Great, terrific. Thank you. One last question. Has Victoria reached peak gas? I'm going to say absolutely. But Nick, any comments on that?
I think it's probably right to say that I don't see our gas consumption increasing, right? So you look at where our gas consumption goes. As I said earlier, 50% of it is in household heating and hot water. Based on the government's announcements today, that is going to start going down. We're still connecting houses to the gas grid, which is something we should definitely stop, or at least certainly strongly discourage. So it's the increasing overall gas connections that is the only thing preventing our residential gas consumption from going down quite quickly, because efficiency is improving and we're seeing more and more electrification of appliances. As we build giant batteries, as the state government is committed to, and as AGL announced yesterday, the more we build those big batteries, the less gas we're going to need for power generation, which is probably only about 20% of gas consumption in Victoria. The other 30% of gas consumption in Victoria is commercial, called commercial and industrial. A lot of that is used for heat could be electrified, but there is a small amount that is, using it as a chemical. But I certainly think that from here on, we will see gas usage in Victoria going down quite considerably over the next decade. And I think there's a really strong argument to be made that we just don't need any additional forms of supply.